Minnesota is battling one of its worst outbreaks of measles in decades. Some parents in the Somali community chose not to vaccinate their children out of fear they might become autistic. In this town hall, Vaccine and Autism, Myths and Facts, we examine their fears, cultural differences, and the stigma of autism.
Hello, I'm Vincent McCory with the Voice of America. Now, this is a special program, Vaccine and Autism, Facts and Myths, a town hall brought to you by the Voice of America in partnership with the University of Minnesota. Now, we're joining you from the Cowles Auditorium at the Humphrey School of Public Affairs. Well, now, let me introduce you to our distinguished panelists. To my extreme right, Deka Ifra Hussein. Well, she's a mother of an autistic child. Ms. Hussein has a master's degree and a teaching license in autism. Next to her, Dr. Mark Schleiss is a professor, Division of Pediatric Infectious Disease and Immunology, University of Minnesota. Then we have Dr. Mahmoud Afkashi, Director of Gargar Clinic and Urgent Care. And finally, Kristen Eversman, Director of Infectious Disease, Epidemiology, Prevention and Division, Minnesota. They will answer my questions from this studio audience, and questions that will come through on our Facebook page from our audience online. Now, for months, Minnesota has been battling with an outbreak of the measles. The outbreak appears to be contained, and the vaccinations rates are going up. But some parents may still have doubts about the benefits of the measles vaccine. And we hope this town hall will help to clear up any misconceptions, any confusion, and dispel any myths. But first, let's take a look at this story about two University of Minnesota researchers who have been working on a brain scan to detect autism. Now, they know that early detection can help doctors and, of course, parents to create strategies to help children lead productive and independent lives. Let's take a look.
My name is Jed Elison. I'm an assistant professor with the Institute of Child Development and the Department of Pediatrics at the University of Minnesota.
I'm Jason Wolf. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Educational Psychology at the University of Minnesota.
We recently published a paper that summarized some very exciting results in which we used brain imaging methodology to characterize patterns of brain development at 6 and 12 months of age that predict whether a child will be diagnosed with autism at 2 years of age.
And so this has really set us on a new course of understanding how we might identify children and babies with autism, how we might be able to provide even earlier interventions than we ever thought possible, and possibly one day intervene before a baby even shows the first symptoms of autism.
The data from our study are suggesting that the brain is changing before the behaviors of autism begin to manifest. And this is very important because we know that early intervention helps kids with autism. In our sample, we were able to predict with a very high degree of accuracy who would go on to develop autism, greater than 80% accuracy.
I think it is good news. It's hard because science moves slowly. It's not as though we have these infant interventions ready for the general public, and it's not as though we can yet identify babies with autism in the community yet. But it's good news because this work is underway.
anigu waxaan u arkaa To me, everything that doctors recommend is good for the development of the children's health seems good to me. But parents are not the same. There are some parents who do not even accept X-ray for a 2-year-old child. They say it affects the child's health.
There's no radiation in an MRI. It's non-invasive. It's safe. The only risk that we know of from MRI are the loud noises. And so what we do is we're very careful at attenuating the sound and protecting the child's hearing.
We've come to understand that autism is much more complex than we once thought. It's an umbrella term, but it's really probably made up of a bunch of different disorders that we haven't come to yet understand. There are hundreds of genes that are associated with autism, and that means that there are probably many combinations of genetic factors that can lead to it. And we still have a lot of work to do to understand all of the different autisms that are actually out there.
Well, now, before I ask you my first question, now you've kind of been my student for a few minutes. I hope you paid attention. I'd like you to, beginning from the extreme left, right, to kind of respond to the video we just watched. Is something you want to just highlight out of that?
I was listening to it, and it's true. There are fears within the community. There are people that believe autism is caused by vaccination, but I feel like because the fears are there, it's a starting point for every profession. It's starting point for the doctors, it's starting point for the parents, and a starting point for the educators. And one thing I took from watching a mother speak is that as a parent, your right is to protect your child's safety. And early intervention is proven to work both medically and educationally. And our goal should be, how do we get to that point? How do we get to the point where we are helping that parent understand that early prevention is the key before we go into a responding mode?
Thank you very much, Ms. Hussain. Dr. Schleiss.
I very much agree with your comment. I think it's very, very important as we have these kinds of discussions to try to tap into the fear because we can show lots of data. We're good at quoting statistics and providing numbers. But at a deeper layer, if there is a fear and an uncertainty exists, then that's something we have to learn to understand how to deal with. One thing about this video that I am excited about is the cutting edge research being done by these investigators. And it makes me reflect on the fact that we need more research on the causes of autism spectrum disorders. We need to understand why this is happening. And one thing we worry about when we talk about vaccines is that all of the resources and effort and time and money that goes into proving what we already know to be true, which is that vaccines don't cause autism. Those are dollars and resources that could be used for these kinds of studies that are really giving us novel, new information. So that was my thought.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Schleiss. Dr. Afgash.
Watching this video makes me think that there are people who are committed to doing research. I would love to see research on the etiology, the cause. This is very good, one good step, but I think more studies on the genetic aspect of autism and resources devoted to that would also be more important than the MRIs will show us what happens in the brain of kids who are developing. Obviously, it's a step forward, but I think etiology, the cause of this condition, is more important for the parents, for the healthcare providers, for the community. That would save a lot of resources. The other thing is Somalis are coming from an entirely different culture. Coming to America and having kids with autism is a double burden for them. it is very hard for them to cope with it. It is very hard for them to learn how to cope with it. And it's very hard for them to get all the resources they need to cope with it. So they need spatial resources from the state and from the federal government to help them understand and cope with the issues. Thank you.
Yeah, and we'll expound further on that. Now, finally, on just a comment on that video, Michelle Erisman.
Well, I think that my colleagues did a very nice job, but I'll just reiterate that I agree with the importance of early intervention and making sure that we're educating parents about the importance of normal developmental milestones, and if they see something that's not fitting that, to go in and have their children evaluated early. I was also very encouraged by this new information, and it just speaks to the fact that we continue to learn more about autism, and so I found that encouraging. And then I do agree with what Dr. Schleiss said, that we really should be putting our energies into doing more research on autism itself, and not directing energy into kind of rehashing things that we're already familiar with. Okay,
so we'll talk a little more about autism, but Dr. Schleiss, I want to go back to the whole outbreak of measles. We are happy that has been put under control, but can you help us appreciate how this was put under control in the city?
Well, I think that key to controlling the outbreak was first and foremost the collaboration and willingness of the Somali American community to invite health officials, public health experts, physicians, into the community to talk about this. Without that kind of cooperation and positive collaboration, I don't think we would have gotten things under control. So I think that really most of the credit really should go to the community, to the imams, to leaders in the community for opening up their community to hear the message. I also give enormous credit to the Minnesota Department of Health, Dr. Erisman, of course, who's here with us, Lynn Bata at the Minnesota Department of Health, who played an amazing leadership role, I think, in putting together information. I'm sure we'll hear more about that. And so I think at the end of the day, it was knowledge, awareness, openness to discuss the problem, and then finally vaccination. We've seen, as Chris alluded to, upticks in vaccination out in the community, efforts on disease control in our local hospitals and facilities, including the University of Minnesota Masonic Children's Hospital. So working together, I think we've made some real strides in controlling this, and that is so important. Finding a way to collaborate and interact in a positive fashion, and not have this be a confrontational or oppositional kind of situation. We all need to work together and learn from each other.
Thank you. And I want to remind you all that we welcome questions from you, as I mentioned earlier. So, feel free at some point to step up to the microphone. If you can look to the right there, we have a microphone. We'll ask you to come forward, and when you have your question, please think through it, make it concise, very direct, and if you want it to be answered by a specific person, you can let us know, or if it's just to any of them. But we want to make sure it is brief, to the point, so that many of you can get to ask your questions. Further, I just wanted to ask if you have any other further comment on how this was put under control, but also, is it uncommon? Is it uncommon for communities, not only here, not only the Somalis, but anywhere in the world, to be concerned about vaccination for whatever disease?
Well, I'll start with some of the things that Dr. Schleiss mentioned about getting the outbreak under control. Certainly vaccination, community outreach, and there were a number of public health measures that were taken both by the healthcare facilities as well as public health, and the parents cooperated greatly. And that is that when we had children who were susceptible to measles, who had been exposed, we asked their parents to exclude them from group activities, schools, childcare. And those parents did that. We had almost 600 individuals who fell into that category. And those parents did that for the good of the community. And we really think that that also contributed to slowing the outbreak down. And now at this point, we're hoping stopping it. So I want to thank those parents because it was not easy for them to comply with that request.
Yes.
And then in terms of the question of, are there other communities asking questions about vaccine? Yes, vaccine questions are something that are common for all parents. I remember when my son was born and I was working in this field, and when you have a child, all of a sudden your focus is on that child and what's the best for them. And so you obviously have questions. So we know that it's a common thing across multiple communities, but for the Somalis it's been more intense because of their concerns about autism, and that sort of intensified that normal questioning that parents have.
Okay. Now let's give a chance to one of the members of the audience, a lady who's right in front of the microphone. If you can identify yourself, please, and then ask your question.
My name is Fedjamo, and I have a 13-year-old who has an autism, and that's what the doctor told me. But I just want to know, how can you tell if your child has an autism, and what is autism?
Okay, I think I'll direct that to Ms. Hussein. First, if you can share freely that your personal experience and see if you can respond to our question.
Hi, Fatima. Autism is a neurodevelopmental disability. It's a delay. Our children's neurodevelop, like their brain is wired differently, as everybody says. But talking from a mother to a mother, you know that your child, you're always comparing your child and looking at the developmental milestone, or looking at 6 months, your child should be looking you in the eye. They should be able to smile. At 9 months, they should know you from the rest. At certain ages, your child, when you can't leave your child with strangers, they should have some kind of emotional attachment to you. Children with autism do not sometimes, even though it's a spectrum, and we have high functioning kids with autism and low functioning kids with autism, they're different because the word auto is self, right? So they're not aware of their surroundings. The way I had something, like I had an older child who met all the milestones, and I vaccinated both of them. But when my child, I call his name and he's not responding to me, and I go to the playground and kids his age are talking and interacting with their siblings, that was a red flag for me. And I'm glad your child is, progressing, and he's 13 years old. But the more therapies, there in education, there are 45 evidence-based practices. Not all 45 of them work for every child. I will say, keep trying, study his IEP, and make sure that he's making progress from quarter to quarter. And if he's not making progress, ask why.
Thank you for that, personal kind of experience. Now, any of you, if you can, please, can you give some kind of some clarification of what is autism, so somebody can get an idea medically what it is? Dr. Schleis or Dr. Afgashi?
Go ahead.
Okay.
It's hard for me to improve on your response, and it's certainly not one of my major areas of expertise. In the laboratory, I studied more the virus and less the person. But this idea of a pervasive developmental and social disorder is sort of my understanding of autism, and I think you articulated it very well. I think one of the challenges that we've faced for many, many years is that many of these disorders become evident to parents and pediatricians about the time that we give the vaccine. And so there's a strong temporal relationship between when autism begins to become obvious or apparent and the timing of our immunizations. It's a powerful coincidence. And many people who, again, have this deep conviction that the vaccine is responsible look to the timing and say there must be some cause and effect relationship here. So I think that's one of the really important points to think about as we have this discussion.
Before we get further comments, we have another question from the audience. Please identify yourself and ask the question.
My name is Abdurizak Chama. I have a child with autism, 14 years old. I've been living this situation last 12 years. I am early childhood education teacher. I have child development. I have education for psychology. I am a student in Metro State University for psychology. This question, it's not related to my case. And I think for my experience, what I have seen, it is, I feeling that's some kind of misleading. And if I start 1 minute for that, the day my son get the vaccination from back England clinic, I was with him. It was 2004, September 15. He was developed normally. I learned, just child development. When you're evaluating a child, you have to look 5 developmental domains: language, cognitive, social and emotional, physical. According to their chart, before that day, my son was typical. They used to tell me that your child is healthy. After that day, just after 5 minutes when I left from the clinic, my child start seizure, my child start vomiting, and I come back to the clinic. And I explained the situation. And I said, my child is not normal right now. They called the doctor. I spoke to the doctor, the nurse at the same place. I was told that this signs we see is a febrile seizure, and it will go away after 3 days. I come back after 10 days. I come back after 3 months. After 5 months, when I begging to send my child evaluation and assessment because this is not normal, they sent me, for evaluation, and I was told that my son is autistic. That's the first day I heard the word autism. I come back to the clinic, and I was thinking all night, what is the word of autism? I come back to the clinic, and I said, I know my child was vaccine injured. That's what I know. I don't know that word autism.
Okay, so...
Okay, my question is here.
Yeah.
I was in the panel. I was kicked out. I have to have, to have to write the 3 questions. There is a misleading for the community. This is MDHS. It's a corrected code 1760863. They changed. They wanted to manipulate our community. There was a lot of misleading. That question is, and what we are seeing, it's not, I don't see this event is not presenting our community, it's not presenting the right people. Just I really get upset for this.
Let's get some response here. First, Dr. Afgashi, do you, I don't know if there's anything you can kind of say to the gentleman in relation to the fact that he does have a strong belief that the child reacted and started developing what he came to learn is autism just after the vaccination. Is that a common concern among the people of Somali extraction?
I haven't done any research on or any study on how many people believe that autism is related to vaccination. But as a professional, I search the studies that were done by the CDC. I read the New England Journal of Medicine. None of them connects the vaccine to the autism. And the largest study that I'm aware of was done in Denmark, from 1991, January 1991 to December 1998. They studied over 500,000 kids. Out of those, 770 or 760 were autistic. They compared those who were vaccinated against those who were not vaccinated. They didn't find any correlation or any significant risk ratio in that. That is probably one of the most powerful studies that I can refer to. CDC, if you go to the CDC website, you can see and you search autism and MMR. You would see on the front page that they state that autism is not related to MMR. Now, many kids, as you all know, can have side effects from the vaccine. It is known that MMR can cause seizure in some kids post-vaccination. Now, whether that has led to the autism or not is very hard to talk about. But I think it's very common to have side effects, and the timing that these things occur makes parents suspect that the government or somebody is hiding something. But we are honestly looking at the data that we have as of today. I didn't find any evidence. But we need to do more research. Yes, he has the right to ask questions. He has the right to be worried. He has the right to invoke everybody so that some research is done, and one day somebody gives him an answer.
Yeah. Thank you. Let's get another question from a member of the audience. Right. Gentlemen.
Okay, I don't want to add fuel to the fire, and I'm not anti-vaccine, so don't throw any rocks at me, okay? So thank you, Dr. Afgarish, and thank you, Dr. Mark Schleiser. The question I have is that many parents like him and others, not only in the Somali community, but blacks, whites, and other community in general have been affected by the autism, and predominantly actually it affects more on a black communities in general, or African descent. So coming back to your point that you said you don't have enough data, but we've got a CDC whistleblower, Dr. William Thompson, who said there was a connection between the vaccine and autism. However, that data was dumped, meaning you would not be able to read it and you wouldn't be able to assess that event. So I know Dr. Mark has already made the point of, he said, I don't think that vaccine caused autism. You know, if he doesn't get that data, obviously he's going to get that to the conclusion. So my question is, how can you neglect the parents like this gentleman right here and others who've had kids who are healthy, strong, and again, I'm not anti-vaccine, but I'm for safety, and talk about MMR as the root cause of maybe potentially root cause, but how come we don't address that issue and say this may lead to it, so let's kind of look back and say, set it aside for a different time and really look in depth in that information, instead of neglecting parents and those who are really affected by this in autistic cases.
Thank you very much. Let's have a response from Ms. Harrisman.
Well, the study that you're referring to, or the data that you're referring to, is all on and available on the CDC website. So it's been addressed, and that information is there. And the explanation that is given with the concern about, was there any, not missing data, but was there any issue with the data? And that is that when they compared Caucasian children to African American children, they were under-vaccinated. And in order to qualify for the autism support programs, they had to be vaccinated. And so that actually affected some of the data in the study. And so that's part of the reason that there's some confusion, but that is all available on the CDC website. And I'll just add a personal point here, since we're talking about this issue. My son was diagnosed with autism. It's not something that was in the materials, but he was diagnosed with autism in first grade. He had had seizures prior to that, petit mal seizures, and so when you're talking about your concerns about seizures, I understand that, and remember going to the neurologist and getting that diagnosis. So I just want to acknowledge that as we're discussing this topic, it's a topic that I certainly can relate to, and I can relate to parental concerns. I'll say that my son is a happy ending. We talk about the spectrum of autism, and he graduated from college, and he spent a year teaching English in China. So he's definitely a happy ending, but I do want to acknowledge that as we talk about these issues, it's not something that is foreign to me.
We're going to get to a question from one of our social media followers, a Facebook question. And as we prepare to get it up, I just wanted to ask you, Ms. Hossain, in relation to the time you vaccinated your child and when you got to learn that the child is autistic, did you see any connection between the symptoms and the vaccination? When did you vaccinate the child, and when did you get to see the signs?
Yeah, I vaccinated my child around 12 months, but I didn't hear about autism. I lived in Houston, Texas, so I wasn't, but when I moved here, and he was around 18 months, taking him to the well child checkup and him not responding to his name, I never made the connection that because I vaccinated, he wasn't talking. Because I had a child older than him that was also vaccinated on the same schedule who responded to her name, what I focused my energy, I have a background in education. I was a general ed teacher before I became a special ed teacher. So I knew that I was well versed in the education system. I accessed early childhood special education and early intervention, speech and OT. And what I studied and focused on are the 3 areas that autism actually impacts the child. It impacts their social development, their communication development, and I saw the red flags of repetitive behavior. Therefore, I was never suspecting because I was...
Good. And you didn't see the correlation between the vaccination and the autism. Let's get, before we come to our audience questions here, let's get to a Facebook question. We're going to have it up on the screen. So this is Tamal Kabir. It says, autism was never a Somali disease. Somali children are known to communicate well. This is a foreign disease to destroy the Somali future generation. Stop the vaccine, it just makes it worse. Now, it's a tough one. Let's first, I'll ask you this, not because you have some Somali connection, Dr. Afgashi, but now what do you tell those who say this is not something we've seen in our communities?
Well, first of all, this person who is writing this says that autism was never a Somali disease. Now the question is, did we ever have a research or diagnosis in autism in Somalia? I don't know. Now, having kids here in the United States with autism and having all kinds of nationalities or races having autism, the question is, are they different from the other kids? I don't know. It says 1 in 68 kids in the United States can have the spectrum. That's what the CDC says. And there are all kinds of nationalities or background. Yes. So it's very hard to answer a question like that. Yeah. And I don't know whether it's because we migrated to the coldest place on earth. Something is going on.
And of course, this vaccination is not directed just to the Somali community, right? Because that's what the question seems to purport.
The question is, we have MMR, we have vaccination programs in Somalia. We do not associate vaccination with autism in Somalia. Kids who were born here and those who were born in Somalia both had MMRs and vaccinations. No one has done a comparative study in this, and it's very hard to prove.
Okay, thank you. Let's get some more questions from our audience in the studio. We had you before, so let's. You have another question? Then
yes, I have a question. I am a mother who has a child who has autism. My name is Safia Azman. I thanks all the panel who came here today. I also want to the community who came here today to listen, to hear what we have to say. I have a child who was normal when I took him to the doctor. When I took him, he had many vaccinations. But what I say is I saw ear infection increase as I see. I saw eczema. I saw food allergy. All our kids who have immunized, all those diseases they have. But the last is they have autism. What I'm saying is we are being silenced. If we want to say something, they've been saying, oh, those are the parents, they are lying. Our community are being used. And we are saying is, you don't need research, ask us. When you take your child and he's a normal, he's talking, and you take to the doctor and being immunized, and he come back, he has seizure, he has fever, he's not talking the way he was talking. We have videos, the kids who were talking before and afterward, they're not talking. Some are very serious than others.
Thank you.
Are you telling us now that we are lying? One more question, please.
Yes.
I want to ask you the Somali doctor. He's a Somali doctor. We never knew autism what it was. He was the face of our community. He may be paid Somali government, he went to school for it. I'm not saying, but what we were expecting him to go to the Somali families who are their children are sick and say, ask them, question them, what is wrong with your child? Not coming to this panel, just talking more immunized, and add more to the fire. We already been, our children already have this disease.
Okay.
One more thing, we are not the family, we are not the first communities being affected by, what is it called? There was Amish families, there were Jewish families in Bronx. You never hear from the news that they have Jada'a, but you only hear from Somali communities.
Let's have them respond to this, but I would have, thank you. I would have wanted to ask you if you really believe this vaccination is only targeted to Somalis, because I live in another place and all my children have been vaccinated and others too. But let's get the next question, and then you may have this in your mind as you respond to the other question.
My question is very simple. By the way, my name is Abdurrahman Mursal, and predominantly children with autism are boys. Why so?
Boys, okay.
I think I made it simple.
Okay.
What's the question?
It's a good question, and they're all boys, predominantly says they're mostly boys, not girls. Is that accurate? Is there a study that can qualify that? Dr. Schleich, do you know anything about it?
I think it is accurate that there's a trend toward autism being more prevalent in boys. I certainly don't have the explanation genetically, biologically why that's true. Given that men have only one copy of the X chromosome, perhaps there's a genetic clue there. We certainly know that men are more prone to many diseases, including boys. But I don't have the answer to that.
Okay, thank you. And we don't want to forget also what the lady who just went up, who said quite a number of things about the Somali community and the vaccination, and the fact that there's been a lot of that kind of response from the community. What's your thought? Let me go with you, Ms. Erisman.
You mean that the community has expressed a great deal of concern?
Yes, and that nobody's listening, nobody's responding to their concern.
I think that there have been a lot of outreach efforts to the community, and I think people are interested in hearing the concerns of parents. I think one of the goals of the outreach that the Department of Health has done, and you'll hear about that more in the second panel with Osley, who's actually been doing the outreach, is to make sure that parents are aware of resources that are available to them. And so that parents of children with autism know what resources they have and what helps are available. I think that as we've talked about, the goal of getting kids evaluated and into care and to receive special resources and intervention at an early age is really important, and that's part of the outreach that's being done to the community.
Well, thank you very much, and time flies. Time goes really fast. This is a 90-minute town hall. You see, we've come to the end of the first half, and we'll end it at that point. The second half of this special program will be in the Somali language, and it will be hosted by my colleague Mohammed Oland. So I want to thank you all for watching and also for the questions that have been asked from the audience. Thank you very much.